if you know what it is you're trying to accomplish, which should be more than the academics. If you know what it is you're trying to accomplish, why you're doing it in the first place, that idea is going to govern every decision you make in your homeschool from then on out.
Hey everyone, this is Yvette Hampton. Welcome back to the Schoolhouse Rocked podcast. I am so glad you've joined me today. I am back with another excellent guest. Her name is Lea Ann Garfias. That was a tricky one to say. Before we go, I'm like, how do you say your last name? I'm not exactly sure. So Garfias is how you say it. That is a fun last name. I am so glad to have her on. A few weeks ago, I got an email from her publisher and said, she's got this new book that's out. And we get a lot of books and a lot of inquiries. Lots of people message us all the time wanting to be on the podcast, which is really fun and really great. And that's how we get a lot of our guests. And so they oftentimes will send us their books that they have, and some are fitting for homeschool families, some are not. And so this is one that they said it's a book and it's called Everything You Need to Know About Homeschooling. And I thought, well, that's fascinating. That sounds like a fantastic book. And of course, my first question is always, does it align with our mission as Schoolhouse Rocked, and does it point people to Jesus? And so that's always the first question that we ask. And I learned that this one does. And then I got the book and I thought it was going to be, maybe like a 1/2 inch thick. And it's like, 2 inches thick. It's this fantastic book. It's basically, so it's the comprehensive, easy to use guide for the journey from early learning through graduation. So we are going to talk with Lea Ann, the author of this book today, and I'm really excited for you guys to be encouraged by her. I know that you will be. Lea Ann, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. Great to meet you, Yvette.
Yeah, thank you. It's so much fun to be here with you. And, as I've looked through this book, I just started reading the introduction the other day. I had kind of flipped through it and I just thought, man, this is a wealth of information. And I was reading your introduction, and I love talking to second generation homeschoolers because it's neat to just, there are not a lot yet. It seems like homeschoolers are still kind of moving into adulthood, but there's not a lot of second generation homeschoolers like yourself who have homeschooled their kids, and their kids are now graduated and moving into adult life. So I would love for you to introduce us to yourself and your family, and kind of your homeschool journey from being homeschooled yourself to homeschooling your own children.
All right. I live in the Dallas area, and there are 8 of us. My oldest is 23. He graduated about, I don't want to think how many years ago it was. Was it 5 years ago?
Yeah,
and he's working now in a bank. He's a banker. And then my next daughter, Adana, is 19, and she's studying early childhood education at Dallas Baptist University. And then I have a 17-year-old who's graduating this month. He should finally finish that work. Wow. And then I have 3 more, a 14-year-old. He's getting ready for high school, and then 10-year-old twins, and they were adopted. So they've been homeschooled since they moved in with us 4 years ago, I want to say. Time keeps going by too fast, Yvette.
Right.
I can't even think about when all this was. But I was a homeschooler in the dark ages of homeschooling in the late 80s and early 90s, when it was just building momentum in the United States. And it was still quasi illegal in many areas, including Michigan, where I was homeschooled. So we were still kind of underground. We had a super secret name of our school, and it was super exclusive. Only 2 of us were ever accepted into the school program.
Very elite.
So it was very different than now, which is really strange to just openly say that we're homeschooled. That still strikes me as weird, that I can just say to the cashier, oh, yes, we're homeschoolers. And she will say back, oh, yeah, my neighbor's homeschooled too. It's become so much more common now than it used to be. But yes, we second generation homeschoolers walk amongst you. You just can't tell. It's so funny because homeschoolers don't stick out like a sore thumb like they used to. So there's a lot more second generation homeschoolers than you realize. We're just blending in with society. Yeah. But in spite of that, I didn't want to homeschool. back then, it was much harder to homeschool. There weren't as many resources. There wasn't the same community. The curriculum was hard to get and hard to use because it wasn't really developed for homeschoolers. Like now, most homeschoolers were using school textbooks as we were. So it was a lot harder to teach one-on-one with these methods. So my mom, like so many other homeschool moms then, were spending hours and hours every day preparing to teach. And even as I got into high school and I preferred to learn on my own, that's just how I learned best. Having someone else stand there and tell me was much harder and so annoying. I just wanted my mom to leave me alone. So even though I was reading the textbooks and figuring out the stuff on my own, it was still very time intensive just to grade something, just to find the solutions of the math papers or to find, to grade the writing and the literature and the tests. It was a lot of work. And I didn't want that for myself. I didn't want to define myself. This is so funny, Yvette. I didn't want to be defined by the word homeschool. I didn't want anyone to ever equate my name with that. And that's not what I wanted my identity to be. I wanted to do other things with my adult life. And then we began having children. When our oldest was 3 years old, we were actually working at a church. I was teaching music over there and working in the music ministry and teaching private lessons. And I always assumed that my children would go to school there too. But when he was ready for preschool, my husband said, why don't we start homeschooling him? And well, for one thing, we all know now that you're not supposed to be teaching 3-year-olds. Right. They have better things to do than sit at the table with a pencil. So there was that. And also, I just didn't want to. And so that was a big argument about whether or not we would homeschool. So he said, do you know what? We're going to do it for just 1 year. That was like the fateful sentence of homeschooling, to try it just 1 year. So we did that. And I became addicted being there while he understood his math problem for the first time, when he first created those patterns with shapes, or when he first put letters and understood how they made a word. It was as exciting as watching him take his first steps. And I didn't want to lose that. And I grew to love those moments with him. Of course, I don't think anyone enjoys homeschooling all day, every day.
No.
It really stinks sometimes to be the homeschool mom. But those moments I loved so much, and I didn't want to give them up. So that's what changed my mind.
I love that. And I like that you talked about how you didn't want to when your husband said, will you consider homeschooling? You're like, I just didn't want to. Because oftentimes, there are so many reasons why parents choose not to homeschool. And oftentimes it's because they don't feel like they can. They just don't feel like they're well enough equipped. They're not going to be a good enough teacher. But sometimes the reason is because they just don't want to. That's a legitimate excuse that people give. I simply don't want to. And there are often things in our lives that we don't want to do. I talk about this with my girls all the time. Can you please do the dishes? I don't want to. Well, I know you don't want to, but if you don't wash them, they're not going to get clean. And if they're not clean, we won't have clean dishes to eat on, or laundry, things like that. There are oftentimes things in our life and in our world that we just don't want to do, but we need to do them because it's either necessary, or because it's what's best, or because it's what the Lord is calling us to do. And it's hard. Sometimes it's hard. And so, in this book that you wrote, one of the things that I appreciate about it is that you make it really clear that homeschooling is not always easy. It's not always fun. There can be days that are really a drag and really, really difficult to get through. And we talk about these things because we don't want anyone ever to listen to this podcast and think that we as homeschool moms have it all together and every day is sunshine and roses. That is not the truth for any homeschool family I have ever met in my life. It sometimes is really, really hard, but it doesn't mean that it's not worth the struggle that we go through. So let's take a quick break. We'll be right back. Are you looking for a fantastic online math program that removes the burden of teaching math? Then Teaching Textbooks is for you. Our family's been using teaching textbooks for years, and we couldn't be happier. Our girls say that it makes learning math fun, like a game, and they love that it's interactive. Teaching Textbooks uses step-by-step video instruction and does all the grading for you. The newest version is available now with an app that even works offline. Sign up for the first 15 lessons for free at teachingtextbooks.com. That's teachingtextbooks.com. We are back with Lea Ann, and we're talking about her new book that she had that just came out called Everything You Need to Know About Homeschooling. And this really is a comprehensive guide to homeschooling. I think I read it on, I don't know if it was the back of the book or on your website. It says this is kind of the book of what to expect when you're expecting for homeschooling. And of course, when I first got pregnant with my oldest, I read the what to expect when you're expecting, because I wanted to know, what am I'd never been pregnant before. I wanted to know what I was in for. And so this book really is the what to expect when you're expecting to homeschool book. And so I love how you break it up into, you kind of go from the beginning, and I'm actually going to kind of read through the chapter headings because they're so fantastic. You've got part one of the book is making and defending the decision. And so you start talking about the why of homeschooling and helping parents to understand what homeschooling really looks like. So you really take it from the perspective of this, here's a mom who maybe she's been thrown into homeschooling. Maybe she really has a heart and a desire to homeschool, but either way, they have no clue what they're getting themselves into. And that's a really scary place to be. I've been homeschooling for more than 10 years, and I still oftentimes just feel like, what am I doing? Or what am I supposed to do next? And it can get really disheartening to not know what direction to go. So then you have a whole first part on getting started, setting goals and how to be a good teacher, how to learn your children's learning styles. And then you've got growing and learning, figuring out what grades they're in. And then you kind of take it to each different step of from early learning all the way up through graduation, which is fantastic. So I kind of want to start at, and then there's resources on the back. We'll talk about those later, but I really want to start kind of at the beginning of talking to those moms who maybe they're feeling moved to homeschool. Maybe they feel like they don't have any other options because of all that's happening right now in the world, and they're just terrified. How can these parents prepare for homeschooling and start their homeschool journey off strong?
I think the first thing you need to know, Yvette, is why do you want to homeschool? You don't have to already make the decision. You need to talk about with your spouse and with the Lord, why am I even thinking about this? What are my goals? What it is I'm afraid of, or what am I trying to avoid? And that can be lots of different reasons. There's no one perfect reason to homeschool. You might decide I need to homeschool because my child has special needs, or because my child is gifted and I want him to maximize his learning. You might say, I want to homeschool because I want to pass on my faith. And I want to ensure that my children understand my relationship with God through each of the subjects that they're learning. The number one reason people homeschooled before this, I think it was as recent as 2016, the number one reason the Department of Education found that people were homeschooling was for child safety. People didn't want their children to be hurt in an institutional school through bullying or from school violence or anything like that. And now we've just seen that explode, that reason, as parents now are also worried about the health of their children and they're deciding. But I think that's the most important. If you have just this nebulous idea, I think I want to try homeschooling, well, you need to ask yourself why. Because like we said before, homeschooling is not fun all the time. It's just like any other aspect of parenting. You don't always love being the mom. I've actually quit being the mom about half a dozen times this week, and it's only a Wednesday when we're talking right now. So you don't love being the mom. You don't love being the wife. You're not going to love homeschooling. But if you know why you're doing it, then when things get a little bit more difficult, you can go back to that and say, okay, if the reason I'm homeschooling is to meet my child's special needs, am I doing that today? Maybe he doesn't understand this lesson. Maybe we're having meltdowns. Maybe I don't understand how to teach this, but am I meeting his needs?
Mhm.
Or am I keeping my child safe? Or am I sharing my faith with my child through how we struggle through this impossible task? If you know what it is you're trying to accomplish,
Mhm.
which should be more than the academics. If you know what it is you're trying to accomplish, why you're doing it in the first place, that idea is going to govern every decision you make in your homeschool from then on out. The materials that you choose, the
Yeah.
methods that you use to teach them, the way you work through those difficult situations, the way you celebrate the wins, all of that goes back to why are you doing this in the first place?
Yeah, I agree completely. And we talk so much about that on the podcast is that if you don't know your why, it's going to be so easy to give up. It's kind of like going into marriage. If you don't know why you're marrying this person, you don't just pick some random guy and say, oh, yeah, I think you're good looking. I think I'll marry you with no reason as to why. Like you get to know him. You have to, get to know him sometimes, over months or over years before you make a lifelong commitment to being married to him. And homeschooling is the same way. You have to prepare yourself. You have to study it. You have to understand why you're doing this because if you don't, it's going to be so easy to give up and throw in the towel because there's always going to be days that are going to be hard. So knowing your why, I agree, would be that first step to preparation. What would be the next step to preparation for homeschooling and then starting strong?
Just start. You don't
Mhm.
have to. I think a lot of homeschoolers or new homeschoolers think they need to have an elaborate plan or they need to have boxes of curriculum or build their bookshelves. When someone asks me about homeschooling, they usually ask, um, am I smart? Are you smart enough to homeschool? Do you have to have a degree? And then they ask, where do I get the books? It
Yeah.
doesn't matter. Get the very minimum, grab a library card so you have some things to read. Maybe go to Barnes and Noble or the grocery store and get a math workbook if that makes you feel better.
Mhm.
Start off with just learning together.
Yeah.
Spending time reading with your child, spending time exploring what are their interests, spending time delving into what is it that they need work with the most. If your child has been in an institutional school, you probably have an idea what subjects he excels in or what things he's really struggling with, his reading or his algebra, whatever it is, and you can just start taking some steps from there. But as a first time homeschooler, don't invest $1,000 in getting
Yeah.
started right away because you don't know what you're doing. And that's a good thing. You
Yeah.
can spend your first year, your first 2 years getting to know your child. How does he enjoy learning? What makes him retain new information better? And what about me as a mom? How do I teach best? Where are my teaching strengths? What kinds of materials am I drawn to when I want to teach? And then you can go after gathering more of those materials after you know a little more about what you want to do. Because homeschooling shouldn't look like everybody else's.
Right.
So don't go buy the same books I use. Don't buy the same books that your best friend who homeschool uses. Wait and find out what's going to work just for you. And then just gather little by little what you're doing. Get started. Just spend an hour a day for the first couple of weeks with your quote unquote homeschool time where you sit down and feel like a homeschooler and then get back up and go on with normal life.
Mhm.
And as time goes on, you'll realize that you and your child are learning so much during the ebb and flow of your day that you don't need to sit down and pick up a pencil for every single subject and every concept you need to teach.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that it's not necessary to buy everything because oftentimes when people jump into homeschooling for the first time, it's so overwhelming. And, I remember going to our first homeschool convention and walking in the building and I had this excitement and at the same time I wanted to cry because it was so overwhelming. I mean, there were so many options. And one of the things I've learned is though you don't want to use the same thing that or I shouldn't say want to, you don't always necessarily need to use the same thing that your friends are using or family members, but it's good to talk with your friends and say, hey, what do you use for history? What do you use for math? What do you use for this and that? And then just ask him, can I check that out for a little bit? Can I borrow it for a few days and just flip through it and see if maybe this would be a good match for my family and I. The other thing that I know a lot of curriculum companies do today is they will offer free lesson plans, maybe the first few, 5 lessons or the first 15 lessons. I know teaching textbooks and CTC math, you can go on and you can do the first 15 lessons for free without any commitment to them. And it's great because it really does give you a taste of, will this work well for my family? Will it work well for my teaching style? Will it work well for their learning style? But yes, we have to learn our kids. We have to learn ourselves, because if we've never been a teacher, we have no idea what our teaching style is. And even some teachers, I would say, often moms who have been trained as teachers, they may not even necessarily understand their teaching style, because when they're teaching in a school, they're teaching according to how the school has told them to teach. And so they may not even know how they can passionately teach the way that God created them to teach their own kids. So I appreciate that. That is a great starting point. We are out of time, but we're going to be back on Wednesday. We're going to continue this conversation, kind of go through the different phases of schooling and education and how we can meet the needs of our kids in each one of those phases. So Lea Ann, where I know you said before we jumped on to record that you do live videos through Facebook, and then you post those as podcasts as well. What is your Facebook group where people can find out more about you?
Yeah, you can join the Homeschool Made Easy Facebook group. It's just Homeschool Made Easy. And then every Thursday at 2 p.m. Central, I interview an expert, a curriculum developer, or author in the homeschool community, and they take your questions live. And then we rebroadcast it. If you can't catch it, you can catch it on the podcast, Homeschool Made Easy.
Okay, sounds great. We'll link to that in the show notes. And that's so great. I love that you get to take those live questions. That's one of the things I wish we could do on the podcast every week, is just sit and talk to our audience live. So I love that you do that. So every Thursday, you said at 2 p.m. Central Time. Okay, yes. Homeschool Made Easy. Thank you so much, Lea Ann, for joining us today. And thank you guys for listening. We will be back on Wednesday to continue this conversation with Lea Ann Garfias. We'll see you then. Have a great day. Bye-bye.